This section of the Chapter 9 lecture is titled The Free Individual, and the focus question is, how did the meanings of American freedom change in this period? And remember, meanings and boundaries of freedom are a big focus throughout Foner's textbook. And now, by the 1830s and 1840s, the market revolution and westward expansion had profoundly affected all Americans' lives, reinforcing older ideas of freedom and creating new ones. American freedom had long been linked with available land in the West, and in this period was coined the phrase manifest destiny, referring to the divine mission of the United States to occupy all of North America and extend freedom to all parts, despite any cost to peoples and nations already living there. But an old idea connecting freedom and a divine mission to move west and settle land had its origins in colonial times. In national myth and ideology, the West would long remain a sanctuary for the free American. To many, the settlement and exploitation of the West offered America a chance to avoid becoming like Europe, where society was marked by fixed social classes and large numbers of wage-earning poor. In the West, free or cheap land was abundant and factory labor less common. The West seemed to offer men facing wage labor and rising land prices in the East an opportunity to gain economic independence, the social condition of freedom. The energetic competitive world of the market revolution led many Americans to identify freedom with the absence of restraints on self-directed individuals who sought economic advancement and personal development. Opportunities for personal growth presented a new definition of Jefferson's pursuit of happiness that well fitted a new America in which westward expansion and market relations shattered old spatial and social boundaries. A group of New England intellectuals called Transcendentalists reflected this national mood in their writings and activities. Together they insisted that individual judgment should take precedence over existing social traditions and institutions. Ralph Waldo Emerson defined freedom as an open-ended process of self-realization in which individuals could remake themselves and their own lives. Henry David Thoreau called for individuals to rely upon themselves. The term individualism was first used in this era. Unlike in the colonial period, many Americans now believed that individuals should pursue their own self-interest, no matter what the cost to the public good, and that they should and could depend only on themselves. Americans more and more saw the realm of the private self as one in which other individuals and government should not interfere. The popular religious revivals that swept over the nation during the Second Great Awakening added a religious dimension to the celebration of self-improvement, self-reliance, and self-determination. These revivals were first organized by established religious leaders worried about low levels of church attendance and reached their height in the 1820s and 1830s when the Reverend Charles Grandison Finney held revivals in New York. Like evangelists in the 18th century, Finney enthusiastically warned his audience of hell and promised them salvation if they would end their sinful habits. Evangelical preachers rejected the idea that man was naturally sinful and preordained to heaven or hell, and argued instead that humans had free will to either live in sin or reach heaven by doing good works. The Second Great Awakening democratized American Christianity and made it a mass enterprise. Religious devotion and attendance boomed, and smaller evangelical sects such as the Methodists and Baptists grew rapidly. Deism, a form of religious belief hostile to organized churches, had been prominent among the generation of the Founding Fathers, but now waned, and Christianity became central to American culture. New religious prophets seemed to appear regularly in early 19th century America, and particularly at large camp meetings especially prominent on the frontier. They preached the doctrine of human free will over predestination. These gatherings saw rich and poor, male and female, and even occasionally black and white worshiping together, pledging to abandon worldly sins in favor of a godly life. The evangelicals stress the right of private judgment in spiritual affairs and the possibility of universal salvation through faith and good deeds. Evangelicals used the opportunities to travel and spread their message, which had been made available by the market revolution, and their mass religion and idea that ordinary Americans could forge their own spiritual destinies resonated with the spread of market values. While evangelicals criticized selfishness, greed, and indifference to the welfare of others, the revivals flourished in areas transformed by the market revolution. Evangelical ministers promoted a controlled individualism marked by industry, sobriety, and self-discipline as the essence of freedom. The Second Great Awakening illustrated how the end of governmental support for established churches promoted religious pluralism and the emergence of new denominations. One of the most successful religions to emerge was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church. Mormonism was founded in the 1820s by Joseph Smith, an upstate New York farmer who experienced religious visions as a youth. He claimed to have been led by an angel to a set of golden plates covered with writing that he translated and published as the Book of Mormon after a 4th century prophet. Depending on one's point of view, the Book of Mormon is either a divinely inspired holy book or an impressive piece of American literature that tells the story of 3 families who traveled from the ancient Middle East to the Americas and evolved into American Indian tribes. Then, according to the Book of Mormon, Jesus Christ appeared to one of these family groups called the Nephites in the Western Hemisphere after his death and resurrection, which meant that the Word of God had been transmitted not only to the people of the biblical Middle East, but the Americas as well. Also, according to the Book of Mormon, the second coming of Christ would take place in the New World, where Smith was God's prophet. Mormonism emerged in upstate New York, a center of the Second Great Awakening, where it responded to the disruptions of the market revolution. The religion was self-consciously democratic, admitting anyone who accepted Smith's message, though African Americans were excluded from the priesthood until 1978, and Smith condemned the selfishness of the rich. Paper money seemed to have little intrinsic value at the time, with gold as the unchallenged standard of value, perhaps explaining why the text appeared on gold tablets. Over time, Smith's visions led him to more controversial views, especially polygamy or marrying more than one person, and he married no fewer than 30 women, which outraged non-Mormons. Driven from New York, Ohio, and Missouri by mobs, the Mormons settled in Illinois in 1839, where they intended to await the second coming of Christ. Smith was arrested 5 years later, charged with inciting a riot that destroyed an anti-Mormon newspaper, and while awaiting trial, he was murdered in jail. Brigham Young, Smith's successor, led over 2,000 followers to the Great Salt Lake in present-day Utah in 1847, where they hoped to escape persecution. By 1852, there were 16,000 Mormons in Utah, and the experience of expulsion shaped their theology. The distinctive practice of posthumous baptism, in which modern members baptize ancestors long dead, seeks to unite families across generations and had led to the establishment of a publicly available genealogical library of records from around the world. The Mormon experience revealed the limitations of 19th century religious toleration in America, but also the opportunities offered by religious toleration. Today, Mormons constitute the 4th largest church in the United States, and the Book of Mormon has been translated into over 100 languages.